Precious Williams was known throughout Rivers State as the elegant and poised wife of Kenneth Williams, a wealthy and respected merchant. Together, they were the image of success and prosperity. Kenneth owned several shops in the heart of Port Harcourt, dealing in all manner of luxury goods, imported silks, spices from foreign lands, and jewelry that sparkled like stars. Life should have been perfect for Precious. She lived in a spacious home with servants at her beck and call, attended the best social events, and had more material wealth than most could dream of. Yet, there was a gnawing emptiness inside her, a loneliness that clung to her soul no matter how grand the lifestyle appeared on the surface. Kenneth was a good man, but over the years, their marriage had become more of a business arrangement than a relationship filled with love or passion. He worked tirelessly to expand his trade empire, coming home late most nights, often too exhausted to even share a meal or conversation with Precious. On one warm afternoon, she decided to take a solitary walk down by the riverside. She had always loved the sound of water lapping against the shore, the cool breeze on her skin, and the vibrant colors of the market bustling nearby. The river represented a sense of freedom she rarely felt within the walls of her grand home. As she strolled along the wooden docks, her gaze fell upon a man standing beside his small fishing boat. His name was David, a simple fisherman whose broad shoulders and sun-kissed skin revealed a life of hard labor. David was handsome in an unpolished, earthy way, and his eyes carried a warmth that made her feel noticed, truly seen, for the first time in years. "Good afternoon," he greeted with a wide smile. "You're Kenneth's wife, aren't you? I see you sometimes at the markets." Precious smiled politely. "Yes, that's right. You're David, aren't you? I think I've seen you down here a few times." David chuckled, wiping his hands on a rag. "Well, there's no escaping the river if you're a fisherman. It's where I spend most of my days. What brings you here?" "I enjoy the peace," she replied, her voice softer than usual. "It's quiet down here." David nodded and gestured toward his boat. "It is. You're always welcome to take a ride on the river if you ever feel like escaping the noise of the town." Precious found herself drawn to the idea. There was something liberating about the thought of floating across the water, away from the constraints of her life. But it was improper, she reminded herself. She was a merchant's wife. Still, David's offer lingered in her mind long after she returned home that day. Days passed, and Precious couldn't shake the image of David from her thoughts. She began to visit the docks more frequently, under the pretense of enjoying the riverside scenery. Each time, she would find herself drawn into conversation with David, his easygoing nature a refreshing contrast to the formality of her life with Kenneth. One afternoon, as the sun began to set, David approached her with something wrapped in cloth. "I have something for you," he said, his voice tinged with shyness. Precious raised an eyebrow. "For me? What is it?" David unwrapped the cloth to reveal a silk wrapper, its vibrant colors shimmering in the fading light. It wasn't as fine or expensive as the silks her husband imported, but there was something beautiful about its simplicity. "I know it's not much compared to what you're used to," David said, scratching the back of his head. "But I saw it and thought of you. The way the colors shine. It reminded me of the light in your eyes." Precious was taken aback. No one had ever given her something with such thoughtfulness before. Kenneth's gifts were always grand and extravagant, but they lacked the personal touch that made this simple silk wrapper feel more meaningful. She ran her fingers over the fabric, feeling an unexpected warmth bloom in her chest. "Thank you, David," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "It's beautiful." From that moment, the silk wrapper became more than just a piece of clothing to her. It represented a connection, a spark that had been missing in her life for so long. She found herself draping it over her shoulders whenever she was alone, savoring the feeling of freedom it gave her. As the days passed, Precious and David grew closer. What began as innocent conversations by the river soon turned into secret meetings. They would sit in David's boat, drifting along the water, talking about their dreams and regrets. Precious shared her loneliness, her longing for something more than the empty shell her marriage had become. David listened, his presence comforting in a way that Kenneth's never was. He didn't try to fix her problems or offer solutions. He simply listened, and that was enough. One evening, under the cover of darkness, Precious found herself in David's arms. It was a moment of weakness, a moment where her desire for connection outweighed her sense of duty. She knew it was wrong, knew that she was betraying her husband, but with David, she felt alive in a way she hadn't in years. His touch ignited something in her that had long been dormant, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to feel without restraint. Their affair continued in secret. Precious would sneak away to the riverside, the silk wrapper draped over her shoulders like a symbol of their shared intimacy. With David, she found the passion she had been missing, the laughter, and the freedom to be herself without the suffocating expectations of society. But in the small, tight-knit community of Rivers State, secrets were difficult to keep. Rumors began to spread, whispers about the merchant's wife spending too much time by the river, about her mysterious connection to the fishermen. Precious and David tried to be careful, but it was only a matter of time before someone saw them together. That someone was Ruth. Ruth was David's wife, a quiet, unassuming woman who had always stood by her husband through thick and thin. She had grown up in the fishing community, her life simple and routine. Unlike Precious, Ruth had never known wealth or luxury, but she had always been content with her lot in life. Her love for David was deep and unwavering, and she trusted him completely until she saw him with Precious. It happened one evening when Ruth was returning from the market earlier than expected. She had heard the whispers, but she hadn't believed them. David would never betray her, she had told herself. He was a good man, a faithful husband. But as she approached the river, she saw them, David and Precious, wrapped in each other's arms, their bodies swaying gently in the boat as the river carried them downstream. Ruth's heart shattered in that moment. The betrayal was more than she could bear, but instead of confronting them then and there, she turned and walked away, her mind swirling with thoughts of revenge. If Precious wanted to play with fire, then Ruth would make sure she got burned. Ruth knew that confronting David or Precious in private wouldn't be enough. She wanted to humiliate them both, to expose their affair in the most public and painful way possible. She began to gather information, watching their movements carefully, biding her time until the moment was right. Her opportunity came during one of the town's monthly market fairs, a grand event where merchants from all over Rivers State gathered to sell their goods. It was the perfect stage for Ruth's plan, a place where everyone who mattered would be present to witness the fall of the esteemed merchant's wife. On the morning of the fair, Ruth made her way to Kenneth's shop under the pretense of buying some silk for herself. She greeted Kenneth with a warm smile, her heart pounding with anticipation. "I hear you have some of the finest silks in town," she said, her voice dripping with false admiration. Kenneth, always eager to show off his wares, proudly displayed his collection. "Indeed, madam. These silks are imported from the finest weavers in the world. Only the best for our customers." Ruth ran her fingers over the luxurious fabrics, pretending to be impressed. But it wasn't the silk she was interested in. It was Kenneth himself. She needed him to be present at the fair, to see with his own eyes what his wife had become. "Are you attending the fair today?" Ruth asked casually. "I hear it's going to be quite the event." Kenneth nodded. "Of course. It's one of the busiest days for my business. Precious will be there too, as she always is. We never miss it." Ruth smiled, satisfied. Everything was falling into place. The market fair was in full swing by midday, the air filled with the sounds of bartering, laughter, and the clinking of coins. Precious arrived with Kenneth by her side, her usual graceful self, wearing one of her finest dresses. But beneath her calm exterior, she was nervous. The weight of her affair with David was beginning to take its toll, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go terribly wrong. As they walked through the crowded marketplace, Ruth watched from a distance, her eyes sharp and calculating. She had been waiting for this moment, and now it was time to strike. Without warning, Ruth marched toward Precious, holding the silk wrapper that David had given her, a symbol of their affair. She had stolen it from David's home the night before, knowing that it would be the perfect weapon. "Precious," Ruth called out, her voice loud enough to draw the attention of the crowd. "This belongs to you, doesn't it?" Precious turned, her heart dropping into her stomach as she saw the wrapper in Ruth's hands. How had she gotten it? What was she doing? Ruth held the silk up for everyone to see, her voice dripping with venom. "This is the silk wrapper David gave you, isn't it? The one you've been wearing during your secret meetings by the river." A murmur spread through the crowd as people began to realize what was happening. Precious felt the ground shift beneath her feet, her world unraveling in front of her eyes. Kenneth, who had been standing beside her, stared at the silk wrapper in disbelief. "What is she talking about, Precious?" he asked, his voice strained with confusion and hurt. Precious opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The crowd was watching, waiting for her response, but all she could feel was a deep sense of shame and regret. Ruth stepped closer, her eyes blazing with triumph. "Everyone knows about your affair with my husband, Precious. You've been sneaking around with David for months, and now everyone will know the truth." The silence that followed was deafening. Precious could feel the weight of the crowd's judgment pressing down on her, suffocating her. She had been exposed, humiliated in front of the entire town, and there was no escape. Kenneth's face was pale, his hands trembling as he clutched the silk wrapper. "Is it true?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Precious looked into his eyes, her heart breaking at the pain she saw there. She wanted to deny it, to make it all go away, but the truth was too heavy to ignore. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry." In the days that followed, Precious found herself torn between the life she had built with Kenneth and the passion she had found with David. The humiliation of Ruth's public revelation weighed heavily on her, and she couldn't escape the judgmental stares of the townspeople. Everywhere she went, she felt their eyes on her, whispering about the merchant's wife who had betrayed her husband for a fisherman. Kenneth, devastated by the affair, had withdrawn into himself, spending long hours in his shop, avoiding any conversation with Precious. Their once grand home felt like a prison, its walls closing in on her with every passing day. David, too, was struggling. He hadn't expected things to spiral out of control so quickly, and he felt guilty for the pain he had caused Ruth. But his feelings for Precious were real, and he couldn't bear the thought of losing her. Precious was left with an impossible choice. Should she stay with Kenneth, the man she had built her life with, despite the emptiness she felt inside? Or should she follow her heart and be with David, even if it meant destroying what little remained of her reputation? And so, Precious stood at a crossroads, her heart heavy with the weight of her decisions. The silk wrapper, once a symbol of freedom and passion, now felt like a chain around her neck, binding her to a life of regret and uncertainty.